My name is Charlotte Hayes, and I just turned 25 years old yesterday. You'd think that would be a moment of celebration, maybe a nice dinner with family, some laughs, a few embarrassing childhood stories retold for the 100th time. Instead, my 25th birthday became the day my entire life shattered into a million jagged pieces. I was sitting in Romanos, this upscale Italian restaurant downtown, surrounded by white tablecloths and flickering candles, when my grandfather walked through those heavy oak doors with a look I'd never seen before. His jaw was set, his eyes were hard, and he was carrying a manila envelope that seemed to pulse with its own terrible energy. My parents went pale the second they saw him. My mother actually tried to stand up, tried to intercept him, but Grandpa Walter just brushed past her like she was invisible. He walked straight to me, placed that envelope on the table in front of my untouched tiramisu, and said in a voice cold enough to freeze hell itself, "It's time she knew the truth about her money." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were bank statements, legal documents, numbers with so many zeros I had to count them twice. $3 million, a trust fund, in my name, set up the day I was born. And I'd never heard a single word about it until this very moment. Before we dive into this nightmare, I need to know where all of you are watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, because honestly, I need to know I'm not alone in this madness. And if you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you gets so much worse. You won't believe how deep this rabbit hole goes. Growing up, I genuinely believed my family was barely scraping by. That wasn't just an impression. It was the entire foundation of my childhood. My parents, Richard and Susan Hayes, made sure I understood from the earliest age that money was tight, that every dollar mattered, that we simply couldn't afford the things other families took for granted. I remember being 7 years old and asking if I could join the soccer team at school. My mother sat me down at our scratched kitchen table and explained, with this pained expression on her face, that the registration fee was just too much right now. "Maybe next year," she said. Next year never came. When I was 9, my 4th grade class took a trip to Washington, D.C. It cost $200. I brought home the permission slip so excited, already imagining seeing the monuments I'd studied in social studies class. My father looked at that paper like it was a bill from the hospital. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and told me we just couldn't swing it. He said he was sorry, said maybe when things got better financially. I watched my classmates leave on that charter bus while I spent the week in the library with the 3 other kids whose families couldn't afford it. I wore thrift store clothes through middle school and high school, not vintage trendy stuff, but genuinely used clothing that sometimes still had the previous owner's name written in faded marker on the tags. My jeans had patches on the patches. My winter coat was 2 sizes too big because my mother said I'd grow into it, but really it was just cheaper to buy oversized than to buy new when I actually grew. I never complained because I thought we were poor, genuinely struggling, doing our best. The narrative continued through high school. When it came time to think about college, my parents sat me down for what they called a realistic conversation about my future. My father explained that they'd love to help me with tuition, but there just wasn't anything saved. My mother cried actual tears while telling me how guilty she felt that they couldn't give me what other parents gave their children. I felt terrible for even bringing it up. I assured them it was fine, that I'd figure it out, that I didn't expect them to pay for something they couldn't afford. So I worked. God, did I work. I had 3 jobs my senior year of high school. I waitressed at a diner on weeknights, worked retail on weekends, and cleaned houses early Sunday mornings before my shifts. I saved every penny I could, living on ramen noodles and whatever leftovers I could sneak home from the diner. I applied for every scholarship I could find, spent hours filling out forms, writing essays, begging for financial aid. I ended up at the local community college because it was all I could afford even with the scholarships. I lived at home to save money, or so I thought. Turns out my parents charged me $800 a month in rent, starting the day I turned 18. $800 to live in our converted basement that smelled like mildew and had exposed pipes running across the ceiling. They said it would teach me responsibility, help me understand the real cost of living. I paid it because I thought they needed the money to keep the house. I worked night shifts as a nursing assistant at the hospital, went to classes during the day, survived on 4 hours of sleep, and felt grateful they were even letting me stay. Looking back now with what I know, I want to scream. Those bank statements in the envelope showed deposits starting from the month I was born, regular contributions from my grandfather, compound interest building year after year. By the time I was 18, that trust fund was worth over $1.8 million. When I graduated community college at 22, drowning in $60,000 of student loans because scholarships didn't cover everything, that fund was worth $2.4 million. And my parents knew. They knew the whole time. They received quarterly statements. They watched that balance grow while they charged me rent to live in a basement. They watched me cry over textbooks I couldn't afford while they had access to millions in my name. That revelation sitting in Romanos, staring at those numbers while my birthday candles melted into wax puddles on an untouched cake, that's when I realized my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies so enormous I couldn't even process the scope of it yet. My hands were shaking so badly the papers rattled. Other diners were starting to stare. My mother reached for the documents, her voice rising into that shrill tone she used when she was about to lose control, and she nearly shouted, "Dad, you had no right." But Grandpa Walter just stood there like a stone wall and said, "I had every right. She's 25. She should have known 8 years ago." Grandpa Walter didn't wait for anyone's permission to continue. He pulled out a chair, sat down heavily like the weight of years was finally catching up to him, and started talking in a voice that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a knife through silk. He explained that Head set up the trust fund the week I was born. That Head worked his entire life saving and investing specifically so his grandchildren would have opportunities he never did. Had been a machinist for 40 years, lived modestly, put every spare dollar into that fund. The terms were crystal clear, he said, spelled out in legal documents drafted by his attorney. I was supposed to be informed about the trust fund when I turned 18. My parents, named as trustees with limited access for legitimate educational and welfare expenses, were supposed to sit me down on my 18th birthday and explain everything. They were supposed to help me understand how to access it for college, for starting my adult life, for building a future. Instead, they told me Grandpa Walter was broke. They said he was barely getting by on Social Security, that he could hardly afford his own bills, that he was getting forgetful and confused in his old age. I believed them completely. I felt guilty for even existing as a burden in his life. When he missed my high school graduation, they said he couldn't afford the gas money to drive 3 hours. When he didn't come to my 21st birthday, they said he was too tired, too old, too poor to make the trip. Every explanation designed to make me think he didn't care enough or couldn't afford to be present in my life. Grandpa Walter's hands were shaking as he pulled out more documents from his bag, old letters with postal stamps dating back years. Head written to my parents every single year on my birthday, starting when I turned 18. Letters asking if they'd told me about the trust fund yet, asking how I was doing with college expenses, offering to meet with me to explain everything. Every letter went unanswered. He tried calling, they blocked his number. He sent emails, they went to spam folders or were ignored completely. For 7 years he tried to reach me, tried to fulfill his responsibility to make sure I knew about the money Head set aside for me, and my parents erected a wall between us so solid I never even knew he was trying. He finally hired a lawyer about 3 years ago, a woman named Patricia Brennan who specialized in trust fund disputes. Patricia investigated and discovered that my parents had been receiving detailed quarterly statements from the bank managing the trust. They knew exactly how much was in there, watched it grow, attended annual reviews with the bank trustee, signed off on documents confirming they understood their fiduciary duties. And they said absolutely nothing to me. My mother's tears started flowing, but they felt calculated somehow, performative. She dabbed at her eyes with her napkin and said in this wounded voice, "We were protecting you, Charlotte. We didn't want you to become one of those spoiled, entitled trust fund kids who never learn the value of hard work." I stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Protecting me? Protecting me from what, exactly? From being able to afford textbooks? From graduating without crushing debt? From not having to work 3 jobs while trying to get an education? My father finally spoke, his voice defensive and angry in a way that made my stomach clench. You don't understand how these things work. Kids who grow up knowing they have money turn out terrible. We were trying to instill values. Grandpa Walter made a sound that was half laugh, half disgusted scoff. You wanted to control her, he said flatly. You wanted to keep her dependent and grateful and unquestioning. Don't dress it up as parenting. The table had gone silent, except for my mother's sniffling, but then my younger brother Marcus spoke up from the other end of the table. Marcus was 22, always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. He looked genuinely shocked, his face pale, and he said quietly, I didn't know about any of this. But Grandpa Walter turned to him with an expression I couldn't quite read and said, That's interesting, Marcus, because your parents told you about Charlotte's trust fund last September, and they gave you $50,000 from it for your business startup. The color drained completely from Marcus' face, confirming the truth of it. My brother had known for months. My brother had taken my money. The business he'd started, the one he'd been so proud of, the tech consulting thing he was always bragging about on social media, that was funded with money stolen from my trust fund. He couldn't even look at me, just stared down at his plate while I felt another piece of my reality crumble into dust. I couldn't breathe in that restaurant anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, the curious stares from other tables burning into my skin like brands. I grabbed all the documents Grandpa Walter had brought, stuffed them into my purse, and practically ran to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and started reading through everything with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The bank statements were meticulous, organized by year. Every transaction documented with dates and descriptions. What I found made my stomach turn. The withdrawals had started when I was 16 years old, right around the time I should have been thinking about college preparations. The first one was labeled Educational Preparatory Fund Withdrawal for $30,000. I never saw a penny of that money. I didn't get SAT prep courses. I studied from a book I checked out from the library. I didn't visit colleges on organized tours. I looked at websites and dreamed about places I'd never be able to afford. That $30,000 vanished into my parents' accounts, and I never knew it existed. The withdrawals continued, getting larger and more frequent as years passed. $20,000 here for student welfare and living expenses. $15,000 there for educational materials and transportation. $45,000 for college tuition assistance. Every single withdrawal had some vague educational justification that would satisfy the bank's trustee oversight, but none of that money ever benefited me. I went to community college on scholarships and loans. I bought my textbooks used or rented them when I could. I rode the bus because I couldn't afford a car. Meanwhile, my parents were pulling thousands of dollars out of my trust fund, month after month, year after year. By the time I added it all up, sitting on that closed toilet seat in a restaurant bathroom with tears dripping onto the pages, they'd withdrawn over $400,000. $400,000 stolen from me under the guise of educational expenses, while I worked myself to exhaustion and went into massive debt. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called the bank directly. The number was right there on the letterhead. A customer service representative answered, and I somehow managed to explain who I was, gave them my social security number and birth date to verify my identity. The woman on the phone, professional but sympathetic once she understood the situation, confirmed everything. Yes, the withdrawals had been made by my parents as trustees. Yes. They'd submitted proper documentation each time justifying the expenses. Yes. Technically, they'd operated within the legal bounds of the trust terms which allowed for withdrawals for my education and welfare. But when I asked if I'd ever been notified about these withdrawals, if the bank had ever tried to contact me directly, there was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "The trustees provided contact information for you that matches their own address and phone number. All correspondence went through them. That even intercepted any mail the bank might have sent. They'd thought of everything. I walked back out to that table feeling like I was moving through water, everything slow and distant and unreal. My parents were still sitting there, my mother still crying, my father stiff and angry. I slapped the bank statements down in front of them and said, $400,000. You took $400,000 from my trust fund. My father's face went hard. We used that money for household expenses that benefited you, he said defensively. A new roof, car repairs, medical bills. You lived in that house. You benefited from those things. I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. You charged me $800 a month to live in the basement, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. $800 a month starting when I was 18. I paid you rent for 4 years while I was in college. That's over $38,000 I gave you, out of my own paychecks from jobs I worked while going to school full-time, to live in a house that you were maintaining with my own trust fund money. The logic was so circular and insane I couldn't process it. They'd taken my money to pay for house repairs, then charged me rent to live in that house, all while I believed we were poor and struggling. My mother switched tactics, as I was learning she did when one approach wasn't working. She pointed at Grandpa Walter and said, her voice venomous now, "Your grandfather is poisoning you against us. This is what he wanted all along, to turn you against your own parents. He never forgave me for marrying your father." Grandpa Walter's expression didn't change. He just said tiredly, "I tried to visit Charlotte dozens of times over the years. You told her I was too sick, or traveling, or couldn't make it. You blocked me at every turn. She missed years of having a relationship with me because you systematically cut me out of her life. And that hit me like a physical blow, because it was true. I'd thought Grandpa Walter didn't care about me, that I wasn't important enough for him to make time for. My parents had stolen my money and my family, isolating me so completely I never questioned the reality they constructed. Sitting there in that restaurant with my birthday cake melting and other diners whispering and taking out their phones to record the drama, I realized I didn't know anything true about my own life. Everything I'd believed, every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I'd felt guilty for being a burden, all of it was built on lies, so massive and so deliberate I couldn't see the bottom of how deep this betrayal went. Just when I thought the nightmare couldn't get worse, Grandpa Walter pulled out another folder. His face was grim as he opened it and slid a document across the table toward me. It was a mortgage refinancing agreement for my parents' house, dated 3 years ago. The loan amount was $200,000. And listed there in black and white, as collateral and proof of ability to repay, was my trust fund. They'd used my money they'd never told me existed, as collateral to take out a massive loan. The house I'd paid $800 a month to live in wasn't just maintained with my trust fund, it was literally leveraged against my financial future. I felt physically sick. The room was spinning. How was any of this legal? How had no one stopped them? Marcus, my brother, was staring at his plate like if he looked down hard enough he might disappear into it. But Grandpa Walter wasn't done with him either. "Marcus," he said, his voice softer but no less disappointed, "tell your sister about the car." Marcus' face went bright red. He mumbled something I couldn't hear. "Speak up," Grandpa Walter said. Marcus finally looked at me, shame written all over his face, and admitted, "Mom and Dad bought me a new car last year. A Tesla. $45,000. They said it was from their savings and my college fund." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. My brother, who I'd helped with homework growing up, who I'd covered shifts for when he needed money, who I'd supported and cheered for, had been driving around in a car that cost more than my annual salary, a car purchased with money stolen from me. And had never questioned it. I turned to my parents, barely able to form words. Did Marcus even have a college fund? My mother looked away. My father said nothing. The answer was obvious. They'd never saved for Marcus' college either. But unlike me, Marcus hadn't needed to work 3 jobs and take out loans. I suddenly remembered Marcus going to State University, A private 4-year school, all expenses paid. Head lived on campus in the nice dorms, joined a fraternity, studied abroad 1 semester in Spain. At the time, my parents told me Head gotten amazing scholarships and financial aid, that he was just so academically talented, the school basically paid him to attend. I'd been proud of him, and maybe just a tiny bit jealous, but mostly I'd felt happy that at least one of us got to have a normal college experience. Grandpa Walter anticipated my question before I could ask it. He pulled out more documents. His lawyer Patricia must have been incredibly thorough, showing tuition payments for Marcus spanning 4 years. Total cost $180,000. Every penny of it paid from my trust fund, listed as educational expenses for beneficiaries' sibling welfare. They'd stretched the terms of the trust to claim that paying for Marcus' education somehow benefited me. The bank had allowed it because my parents were trustees, and the language in the trust was apparently just vague enough to permit it with the right paperwork. Marcus had gotten everything I'd wanted: a full university experience, no debt, spending money for fun, study abroad adventures, all of it funded by the money my grandfather had saved specifically for me. While I was eating ramen in a basement and working night shifts, my little brother was living his best life on my dime, and everyone had lied to both of us about it. "You told me I was irresponsible with money," I said to my parents, my voice shaking with rage now. "You said I wasn't mature enough, that I needed to learn financial discipline. I budgeted every single penny. I bought generic brands at the grocery store. I skipped meals to save $5. I walked 2 miles to work in the winter to save bus fare. And you called me irresponsible." My father's face was hard and cold. "You were always questioning us, always pushing back, always difficult. Marcus was easier. He trusted us." The honesty of it, the casual admission that they'd punished me for having a mind of my own and rewarded my brother for blind obedience, was almost more than I could take. The restaurant manager finally approached our table, a nervous-looking man in his 50s who clearly didn't want to get involved but had to address the scene we were making. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes darting between all of us. Everything was not all right. Everything was about as far from all right as it was possible to get. I stood up, grabbed all the documents, every piece of evidence of my parents' betrayal, and said, "I'm leaving." Grandpa Walter stood up too, offered to drive me. My parents tried to follow, but Grandpa Walter physically put himself between them and me, and said, "You've done enough damage. Let her breathe." My mother's voice rose to a wail. "You're tearing this family apart." And Grandpa Walter, this man who'd tried for years to be in my life only to be blocked at every turn, said coldly, "You tore it apart 25 years ago, when you decided money was more important than your daughter's well-being." We walked out of Romanos while other diners watched and whispered and recorded on their phones, and I knew my life would never be the same again. The birthday I'd expected to be unremarkable had become the day everything I thought I knew burned to the ground. Grandpa Walter's house was nothing like I'd been led to believe. My parents had painted a picture of him barely scraping by, living in some run-down place that was falling apart. The reality was a comfortable ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood with well-maintained gardens and a cozy interior that smelled like coffee and old books. He led me into his living room and gestured for me to sit on a worn leather couch that had probably been there for 30 years. Then he disappeared into what I assumed was a bedroom and came back carrying a large cardboard box that looked heavy. He set it down on the coffee table in front of me with a thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "I need to show you something I couldn't bring to the restaurant," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He opened the box and started pulling out envelopes, dozens and dozens of them, all different colors and sizes. Birthday cards. Every single one was addressed to me at my parents' house, and every single one had been returned to sender, unopened. 25 years of birthday cards, marked with postal stamps showing they'd been sent back, refused by the recipients. I picked one up with trembling hands. It was from my 10th birthday, the envelope decorated with balloons and sparkles. I opened it carefully, the seal cracking after all these years. Inside was a card with a cheerful message from Grandpa Walter telling me how proud he was of me, how much he loved me, and a $50 bill tucked inside. $50 would have been a fortune to 10-year-old me. I'd never seen it. My parents had sent it back rather than let me know my grandfather was thinking of me. There were Christmas presents too, wrapped packages that had been returned, graduation gifts that never made it to me, care packages Head tried to send when I started college. Every single attempt Head made to be part of my life had been blocked, returned, refused. My parents had told me he forgot about me, that he was too caught up in his own life to care about his granddaughter. I remembered crying on my 13th birthday because no card came from Grandpa Walter, feeling abandoned and unimportant. The whole time had been sending cards that my parents intercepted and returned without ever telling me. The cruelty of it was staggering. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd stolen my family, systematically erasing my grandfather from my life so thoroughly that I'd believed he didn't love me. Grandpa Walter's eyes were watery as he watched me go through the box. "I never stopped trying to reach you," he said quietly. "I thought maybe you were angry with me, that I'd done something wrong. It wasn't until 3 years ago that I realized your parents were blocking everything." He explained how Head tried to add me as a friend on social media, only to find that his requests never went through. What he didn't know until his lawyer Patricia investigated was that my parents had created fake accounts in my name, had set privacy settings so restrictive that anyone who wasn't pre-approved couldn't contact me, and had been monitoring everything I posted online. They'd controlled the narrative so completely that when extended family asked about me, my parents could show them my supposed social media accounts and say, "See, she's doing fine, just busy with work." Everyone believed I was thriving because my parents curated a false reality that showed exactly what they wanted people to see. There was a knock at the door, and Grandpa Walter went to answer it. A woman in her mid-50s walked in carrying a leather briefcase, her expression professional but kind. This was Patricia Brennan, the lawyer had mentioned. She shook my hand firmly and sat down across from me, pulling out a laptop and several more folders from her briefcase. "Charlotte," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I've been working with your grandfather for 3 years to document everything that's happened. What I'm about to show you is difficult, but you need to see the full scope of how deliberate this was." She opened her laptop and turned it toward me, showing me a series of emails she'd obtained through legal discovery. They were messages between my mother and father, discussing the trust fund, discussing me, discussing their strategies. The dates went back 15 years. One email from my mother to my father, sent when I was 19. "We need to take more out before she finds out and starts asking questions. She's getting more independent and I'm worried she'll start digging." My father's response: "She's too naive to ever question us. We raised her to trust us completely. Take what we need." Another exchange from when I was 22. "Charlotte asked me yesterday why you and I never went to college. I told her we couldn't afford it and had to work instead. She felt so guilty, she offered to help with the mortgage payment this month." My father's reply: "Perfect. Take her money and make her feel good about helping us. She'll never suspect." Reading those words, seeing how they'd discussed manipulating me like I was some kind of mark in a con game rather than their daughter, made me feel physically ill. Patricia had more plans they'd discussed for draining the trust fund completely before I turned 30, conversations about how to make it look like the money had been lost in bad investments, so I'd never know it existed in the first place. They'd intended to rob me of everything and make it look like there was never anything there to begin with. Patricia explained that she'd already filed a legal complaint with the state's Attorney General office. There was now an open criminal investigation into financial exploitation. The district attorney was reviewing the case for potential charges of wire fraud, theft by deception, and abuse of fiduciary duty. My parents could face serious criminal charges, not just civil lawsuits. The weight of that settled over me like a lead blanket. My own parents might go to prison because of what they'd done to me. Part of me felt guilty for even thinking about pursuing this, old habits of protecting them rising up. But the rational part of my brain knew they'd done this to themselves. They'd had 25 years to come clean, and they'd chosen to lie and steal at every opportunity. My phone had been buzzing non-stop in my purse. I finally pulled it out and saw dozens of messages and missed calls from my mother. The messages were a roller coaster of emotions, cycling from apologetic to angry to threatening within the span of minutes. "Sweetheart, please understand, we were trying to protect you," one read. Then 5 minutes later, "After everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us." Then another, "We're your parents. You owe us respect and loyalty no matter what your grandfather says." The manipulation was so transparent now that I could see it, but I knew if this had happened even a year ago, I might have fallen for it. I might have believed them and apologized for questioning them. They'd trained me so well to doubt myself and defer to their authority that breaking free of that conditioning felt like tearing out part of my own personality. My brother Marcus had texted too. His messages were different, confused, and caught in the middle. I don't know what to believe anymore. They're my parents too. But what Grandpa showed us, I can't ignore that. I'm sorry. I really didn't know until last year, and I should have told you then. I stared at that message for a long time. Marcus had known for months that my trust fund existed, had accepted $50,000 from it for his business, and had said nothing while watching me struggle. He claimed he didn't understand where the money came from, that our parents told him it was from their savings, but he was 22 years old, not a child. Had chosen to accept a story that was convenient rather than ask hard questions. That made him complicit too, even if his role was smaller than our parents'. I didn't know if I could forgive him. I didn't know if I wanted to. Grandpa Walter made tea while Patricia and I went through more documents. She showed me the trust fund's original terms, written in my grandfather's careful handwriting before being formalized by lawyers. Had specified that the money was for my education, for helping me start my adult life, for giving me opportunities and security. Had never intended for it to be a secret. Had trusted my parents to be honest guardians of something precious, and they'd betrayed that trust as thoroughly as they'd betrayed me. Looking at my grandfather across the room, this man who'd worked 40 years in a factory to save this money, who'd lived modestly and invested carefully so I could have chances he never did, I felt a wave of love and grief so intense I had to look away. We'd lost so many years because of my parents' selfishness. Birthday visits and Christmas mornings and ordinary afternoons we could have spent together, all stolen by people who claimed to love me but treated me like property to be managed and controlled. I woke up the next morning in Grandpa Walter's guest room to my phone exploding with notifications. Still groggy, I opened social media and felt my stomach drop. My mother had posted a long, detailed statement on Facebook, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful, manipulated daughter. The post had hundreds of reactions and comments already. My heart is shattered. Shed written. Last night, my own daughter abandoned our family on her 25th birthday, choosing to believe lies told by my estranged father, who has always resented my marriage and my happiness. Money has poisoned her mind and turned her against the parents who sacrificed everything to raise her. I'm devastated, but am praying she comes to her senses and remembers who changed her diapers and sat up with her when she was sick and paid for the roof over her head all these years. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of her. Aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends I'd known my whole life were rallying around my mother, calling me selfish and greedy and cruel. My cousin Rachel, who I'd always been close with, had commented, "I can't believe Charlotte would do this to you. Money changes people. I'm so sorry you're going through this." Uncle Frank wrote, "Your parents sacrificed everything for you and this is how you repay them? Shameful." Aunt Dorothy posted, "Praying for this family. Some children don't appreciate what they have until it's gone." The narrative had been completely flipped. I was the villain. My mother was the wounded party. My grandfather was a vindictive old man spreading lies. Nobody knew the truth about the trust fund or the theft or the systematic manipulation, and my mother's post made sure to paint any mention of money as me being greedy rather than her being dishonest. Shed carefully worded everything to make it sound like I'd thrown a tantrum over not getting access to family money I wasn't entitled to. I tried to defend myself in the comments, tried to explain what had really happened, but I was drowned out by dozens of family members who'd known my parents for decades and trusted them implicitly. Every comment I made was met with accusations of lying, of being disrespectful, of trying to smear good people who'd done nothing but love me. Someone commented that I was having a mental breakdown. Someone else said I'd always been a difficult child, and this was just another example of my problems. The pile-on was vicious and relentless. I finally closed the app because I couldn't handle seeing any more of it, but the damage was done. My entire extended family thought I was a terrible person. It got worse when I went to work. I was a nurse at City General Hospital, a job I loved and had worked hard to earn. I'd been there for 3 years, built good relationships with coworkers, earned respect for being reliable and compassionate. But when I walked into the staff break room that morning, the conversation stopped dead. Everyone stared at me with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. Someone had shown them my mother's Facebook post. In a small city like ours, everyone was connected to everyone else somehow. One of the other nurses, a woman named Jennifer who I'd considered a friend, actually turned her back to me and walked out of the room without a word. Others whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. I caught fragments. Her own mother. Birthday dinner. Money. Ungrateful. Nobody asked for my side of the story. Nobody seemed to care that there might be more to this than a social media post. My supervisor, Linda, called me into her office mid-shift. She was a woman in her 50s who'd always been fair with me, but her expression was troubled as she gestured for me to sit down. "Charlotte," she said carefully, "I've received some concerns from staff members about your judgment and family stability. Now, I'm not here to get involved in your personal life, but we need to address how this might affect your work environment and the hospital's reputation." I felt my face burning with humiliation. "What concerns, specifically?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the situation with your family. Some staff feel that there's been drama that reflects poorly on your character. And we've had patients ask questions after seeing posts online. The hospital values family values and strong character in our employees. We're concerned about whether personal instability might affect your professional performance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was being called into my supervisor's office because my parents had slandered me on social media and turned my coworkers against me. I tried to explain what had really happened, pulled out some of the documents on my phone to show Linda the truth. She looked at them, and I could see her expression soften somewhat, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. But then she said, "I believe you that there's more to this story than I'm seeing online. But the reality is that this drama is affecting the workplace. Other nurses are uncomfortable. There's gossip, and we can't have that kind of distraction in a medical environment. I'm going to suggest you take some unpaid leave until things settle down. Give yourself time to deal with your family situation, let the gossip die down, and then we can reassess." Unpaid leave. I was being punished at work for being the victim of my parents' crimes. I felt the walls closing in. I left the hospital in a daze, drove to my apartment that I'd barely been to since the birthday dinner, and sat in my car in the parking lot trying to process everything. Everywhere I turned, doors were slamming in my face. My extended family hated me. My coworkers thought I was unstable. Even small interactions in daily life had turned hostile. When I went to the gym that afternoon, trying to burn off some stress and anxiety, the woman at the front desk who usually greeted me warmly was cold and professional, barely making eye contact. At the coffee shop where I was a regular, the barista who normally chatted with me about our days was silent and distant, just took my order and moved on to the next customer without the usual friendly conversation. I realized with growing horror that my parents had successfully poisoned my entire community against me. In a small city where everyone knew everyone, where reputation mattered, where gossip spread faster than wildfire, they'd struck first and struck hard with a narrative that painted them as victims and me as a villain. Nobody cared about evidence or truth or hearing my side. They cared about the dramatic story my mother had posted, the emotional appeal of parents betrayed by an ungrateful child. and I was powerless to fight it because anything I said would be dismissed as lies or manipulation or mental instability. My parents had spent 25 years building credibility in this community, presenting themselves as good people who struggled but persevered. I was just the daughter who'd apparently always been difficult and had now shown her true colors by abandoning them over money. Even my best friend Kelly, who I'd known since high school, seemed distant when I finally reached her by phone that evening. Her voice was cautious, measured. "Hey, Charlotte, I heard about what happened. My mom is friends with your mom and she's really upset. Are you okay?" But there was something in her tone, a reservation that hadn't been there before. When I tried to explain the truth about the trust fund and the theft, Kelly listened, but I could tell she was skeptical. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding," she said carefully. "Your parents have always been so good to you. Maybe the trust fund thing is more complicated than it seems. They raised you after all. That has to count for something." Even Kelly, my closest friend, was buying my parents' narrative at least partially. I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my entire life. Patricia Brennan called an emergency meeting at her office 2 days after the social media disaster. Grandpa Walter and I sat across from her desk while she laid out the situation with characteristic bluntness. "Your parents are waging a PR war, and right now they're winning," she said. "They've controlled the narrative, painted themselves as victims, and isolated you from your support systems. We need to fight back with the truth, but we need to do it strategically and all at once so it can't be dismissed or ignored." Shed arranged for a family meeting at the community center, sent formal invitations to every extended family member with a simple message. Evidence regarding the Hayes Family Trust Fund situation would be presented. Attendance strongly encouraged for anyone who wanted to understand the full truth before making judgments. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, neutral territory, with Patricia present as an official witness. I dreaded that meeting more than I'd dreaded anything in my life. But Friday morning brought a new crisis that made everything even worse. A sheriff's deputy showed up at Grandpa Walter's door with legal papers. My parents had filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I'd threatened them and was mentally unstable. The petition was full of lies, statements claiming I'd made threatening phone calls and showed up at their house, acting erratically, and made them fear for their safety. None of it was true. I hadn't contacted them at all, except for a single text telling them I needed space. But a court date was set for the following week, and if the judge granted the restraining order, I wouldn't be able to go anywhere near them or the family home, where many of my childhood belongings and important documents still were. Patricia was furious, her professional composure cracking for the first time. "This is retaliation and intimidation," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're escalating to legal warfare to try to silence you and make you look unstable." She filed an emergency counter-motion and requested an expedited hearing, but the damage was done. Now there were official legal documents floating around, claiming I was a threat to my own parents. Saturday arrived and I felt sick to my stomach as Grandpa Walter drove us to the community center. The parking lot was full, cars I recognized belonging to aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends. Patricia had rented one of the meeting rooms, set up a projector and screen, arranged chairs in rows. When we walked in, I felt the hostility like a physical wave. My parents were sitting in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, my father's arm protectively around her shoulders. Marcus sat with them, but he looked miserable, his face pale and drawn. Other family members filled the rest of the chairs, maybe 35 or 40 people total, all staring at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disgust. Uncle Frank stood up as we entered. "This is inappropriate," he said loudly. "Bringing a lawyer to a family matter. This is exactly the kind of manipulation we're talking about." Patricia didn't flinch. She set down her briefcase calmly and said in a clear voice that carried through the room, "This stopped being a family matter when fraud and theft occurred. Everyone here deserves to see evidence before making judgments. If you don't want to see it, you're welcome to leave." Nobody left. Patricia turned on the projector and started presenting evidence methodically, like she was arguing a case in court. She put up the trust fund documents first. showing the original terms written by Grandpa Walter, showing the date it was established, showing the specific instructions that I was to be informed at age 18. She showed the quarterly bank statements spanning 25 years, highlighting the growth of the fund, the deposits, the compound interest. Then she showed the withdrawals, one by one, with dates and amounts and descriptions. $30,000 for educational preparation I never received, $20,000 for student welfare while I worked 3 jobs, $45,000 for college tuition while I took out loans and paid rent. The numbers added up on the screen. $400,000 withdrawn by my parents, allegedly for my benefit, none of which I'd ever seen. She showed my student loan documents, my rent receipts paid to my own parents, my W-2 forms from the multiple jobs I'd worked simultaneously. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Then Patricia showed Marcus University tuition payments, $180,000 paid from my trust fund over 4 years while I attended community college on scholarships. She showed the purchase records for the Tesla my parents bought him with my money. She showed the mortgage refinancing documents listing my trust fund as collateral. And then, most damning of all, she showed the emails. My parents' private messages discussing how to hide the money from me, how to manipulate me into feeling grateful for their sacrifices, how to drain the fund completely before I could ever find out it existed. The room was absolutely silent as those words appeared on the screen. My mother's and father's names attached to statements about keeping me naive and taking what they needed. I watched the faces in the room shift as evidence piled up. Cousin Rachel's expression went from hostile to shocked to horrified. Aunt Dorothy put her hand over her mouth. Uncle Frank's face turned red, but this time his anger wasn't directed at me. He stood up and turned to my mother, his sister, and said in a voice shaking with emotion, "You told us Charlotte was being greedy and ungrateful. You didn't mention you'd stolen $400,000 from her and lied about it for 25 years. My mother's tears had dried up remarkably fast. Her face went hard, defensive. "We were managing the money as trustees. We had every right to use it for family expenses." Aunt Dorothy spoke up, her voice cutting. "Family expenses? Like buying Marcus a $45,000 car and sending him to private university while Charlotte worked herself to exhaustion and went into debt? That's not family expenses, Susan. That's theft with favoritism." More family members started speaking up, the tide turning as the truth became impossible to deny. Cousin Rachel stood and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I called you names on Facebook without knowing the whole story. I should have asked you directly instead of just believing what I saw in a post." Others apologized too, some looking ashamed, others looking angry but directing that anger at my parents now instead of at me. My father tried to defend himself, standing up and raising his voice. She was always difficult, always questioning our authority, always making things harder than they needed to be. We gave her a roof over her head and food and clothes, and this is how she repays us. His words hung in the air, and I realized Head just admitted the real reason for all of this. I'd been punished for having a mind of my own, for not being as blindly obedient as Marcus, for asking questions and pushing back when things didn't make sense. They'd stolen from me not out of financial necessity but out of spite and a desire to control me. Grandpa Walter stood, and the room quieted out of respect for his age if nothing else. "I worked for 40 years to save money for my granddaughter's future," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "I trusted you two to be honest guardians of that trust. You betrayed my trust, you betrayed Charlotte, and you systematically isolated her from me for years to hide what you were doing. You don't get to play victim now. You're not the victims here." My brother Marcus stood too, his face streaked with tears. "I didn't know the full extent of this until a year ago," he said, his voice breaking. "When Mom and Dad told me about the trust fund and gave me money for my business, they said it was complicated family finances and Charlotte knew about it but preferred not to be involved. I believed them because they're my parents and I trusted them. But I should have asked Charlotte directly. I should have questioned why she was struggling if there was family money available. I'm sorry. I was weak and I chose the easy lie over the hard truth. Patricia wrapped up her presentation by announcing that criminal charges were being filed with the district attorney's office. Wire fraud, financial exploitation, abuse of fiduciary duty, identity theft for the credit cards they'd opened in my name that Shed recently discovered. All of it was going to be prosecuted. Civil lawsuits were also being filed for return of stolen funds, plus damages and interest. My mother screamed. Actually screamed. You're sending your own parents to prison over money. And I stood up for the first time during this whole meeting and said in a voice I barely recognized as my own, "You sent your own daughter into poverty and debt while you had access to millions. You lied to me every day of my life. You poisoned my relationships and stole my family and made me believe I was worthless and a burden. Money is the least of what you stole from me." My parents stormed out of the community center, a small handful of relatives following them, people who I supposed would always defend them no matter what evidence they saw. But the majority stayed. They wanted to understand, wanted to know how they'd missed the signs, wanted to figure out how to help repair some of the damage. Uncle Frank pledged to testify in court if needed. Aunt Dorothy offered me her spare room if I needed a place to stay. Cousin Rachel offered to help correct the record on social media, to post the truth and counter my mother's false narrative. The support felt overwhelming after days of isolation and hostility. I wasn't completely alone. I had allies. The truth was out, and people believed me. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. 3 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, therapy appointments, and slowly rebuilding my life. The district attorney had taken the case seriously once Patricia presented all the evidence. Grand jury indictments came down for my parents. Multiple counts of wire fraud, financial exploitation of a dependent, identity theft for the credit cards I hadn't known about until the investigation uncovered them, and filing a false police report for the restraining order petition full of lies. They faced significant prison time if convicted. Meanwhile, the civil lawsuit was proceeding in parallel, and Patricia was confident we'd win a judgment forcing them to return every penny they'd stolen plus interest and damages. The credit card revelation had been particularly devastating. When I was 19, apparently my parents had opened 3 credit cards in my name without my knowledge, used them to charge vacations and luxury purchases and cash advances, and then defaulted on the payments. My credit score had been destroyed before I even knew credit scores existed. It explained why I'd been denied for student loans at several banks, why I couldn't get approved for a decent apartment when I tried to move out at 23, why everything financial in my life had been such a struggle. They'd sabotaged me in ways I hadn't even discovered yet. The charges for those cards totaled another $30,000 that I was legally liable for, even though I'd never seen the cards or authorized their use. Patricia added it to the lawsuit, but the damage to my credit history would take years to fully repair. My parents hired an expensive defense attorney, some hotshot from the city who specialized in white-collar crime. Their defense strategy became clear pretty quickly. They argued that parents have broad authority to manage their children's finances, that the trust fund terms were ambiguous enough to allow their withdrawals, that everything they'd done was for family benefit even if I didn't directly receive the money. They painted themselves as loving parents, who'd made some questionable financial decisions, but certainly hadn't committed crimes. Their lawyer tried to suppress the emails showing their deliberate planning and conspiracy, claiming privacy violations, but the judge denied that motion. The emails were obtained legally through discovery, and they were absolutely relevant to proving intent. Marcus had cut off contact with our parents completely, had moved out of their house, started going to therapy, and was trying to figure out how to process the fact that had been manipulated and used as a weapon against me for years. He reached out to me several times, wanting to rebuild our sibling relationship, wanting forgiveness. I wasn't ready yet. Intellectually, I understood had been lied to and manipulated too, that he was younger and had been trained since childhood to trust our parents blindly. But emotionally, I couldn't separate him from the betrayal yet. Had driven a $45,000 car bought with my money while I rode the bus. Had studied abroad in Spain on my dime, while I worked night shifts. Had known about the trust fund for a year before the truth came out and said nothing while watching me struggle. Maybe someday I'd be able to forgive him fully, but not yet. Not while the wounds were still so raw. The criminal trial was scheduled, but the district attorney offered my parents a plea deal before it went to court. They could plead guilty to reduced charges, agree to full restitution of the stolen funds plus interest, accept probation instead of prison time, and avoid a public trial. There was one condition. They had to issue a formal public apology, retracting all the lies they'd spread on social media and in the community, admitting what they'd done and clearing my name. The prosecutor wanted my input on whether to accept the deal. Part of me wanted them to face a full trial, wanted them convicted by a jury, wanted the maximum punishment the law allowed. But another part of me just wanted it over. I was exhausted from 3 months of legal battles, from being in constant fight mode, from having my entire life consumed by this nightmare. Grandpa Walter and I talked about it for hours. Do what lets you sleep at night, he advised. Not what satisfies revenge. Revenge won't heal you. Peace will. I thought about what peace actually meant for me. Did I need to see my parents in prison to feel peace? Or could I find peace in them being held accountable through other means? Eventually, I told Patricia I'd agree to the plea deal with some conditions added. My parents had to attend mandatory financial crimes, education, and counseling. They had to agree to no contact with me for a minimum of 5 years, giving me space to heal without their interference or attempts at manipulation. And they had to pay for my therapy sessions as part of the restitution since their actions had directly caused my need for mental health treatment. Patricia negotiated those terms and my parents accepted, avoiding trial and prison time but still facing serious consequences. The hearing where they formally entered their guilty pleas was surreal. We all sat in a courtroom, my parents on one side with their lawyer, me on the other with Patricia and Grandpa Walter. The judge read out the charges one by one, asking if they understood them and admitted guilt. My father answered in a flat, emotionless voice. My mother cried, playing the victim even here, but she still said yes when asked if she was pleading guilty. The judge accepted the pleas and outlined the terms. Full restitution of $520,000, including interest, 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, no contact order with me for 5 years, and community service hours. Then he ordered them to make their public apology right there in court, on the record. My mother stood at the podium and read from a prepared statement her lawyer had clearly written. I apologize for misrepresenting the situation regarding my daughter Charlotte and her trust fund on social media and in public statements. I acknowledge that my husband and I withdrew funds from the trust inappropriately and without Charlotte's knowledge or consent. I retract any statements I made claiming Charlotte was ungrateful or manipulative. She was the victim of our poor decisions. The words were hollow, devoid of real emotion or understanding of the harm they'd caused. My father's apology was even worse, barely audible, clearly something he was being forced to say rather than something he meant. But it was on the official court record now. It would be posted publicly. The lies they'd spread would be officially contradicted. We walked out of that courthouse and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that it was over. That I wouldn't have to sit through a trial and testify about every humiliating detail of my life. Anger that they'd gotten what seemed like a relatively light punishment for 25 years of systematic abuse and theft. Grief for the parents I'd thought I had, who'd never actually existed except in my naive imagination, and underneath it all, a tiny fragile seed of something that might eventually grow into peace. The legal system had acknowledged I was the victim. My parents had been forced to admit guilt. The truth was established beyond doubt. It wasn't everything I'd wanted, but maybe Grandpa Walter was right. Maybe it was enough to let me start healing. 1 year after my 25th birthday, I celebrated turning 26 in a completely different reality than I'd inhabited before. The party was small and intimate, held at my new house, just Grandpa Walter, Aunt Dorothy, Cousin Rachel, and my friend Kelly who'd apologized profusely once she understood the full truth and had worked hard to rebuild our friendship. We sat around my dining room table eating homemade lasagna, drinking wine, laughing at genuinely funny stories instead of forcing cheerfulness over a foundation of lies. The atmosphere was light and warm and real in a way that family gatherings had never been before. No undercurrents of manipulation, no walking on eggshells, no performance for the benefit of maintaining a false narrative. Just people who cared about each other genuinely, celebrating together. Grandpa Walter gave me a gift that made me cry. A photo album Head been keeping for 25 years. Every milestone Head wanted to be present for, but had been blocked from attending, Head marked with a photo and a note. My first day of kindergarten, a picture he must have gotten from the school newsletter, with a note about how proud he was. My middle school science fair, a newspaper clipping showing me with my project, his handwritten comment about my intelligence and curiosity. My high school graduation, a photo someone must have shared online that Head printed out. His note about wishing he could have been there to see me walk across that stage. My college graduation from community college, my nursing school pinning ceremony, every birthday from 18 to 24, all documented with whatever scraps of information about my life Head been able to gather from a distance. 25 years of love and attention and pride, all hidden from me by parents who wanted to erase him from my existence. The year since the truth came out had been the hardest of my life, but also strangely the most freeing. Therapy had been invaluable, helping me process the complex trauma of discovering your entire childhood was built on lies and manipulation. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, had helped me understand that I'd been systematically conditioned from birth to doubt myself, to accept poor treatment as normal, to believe I deserved nothing. My parents had carefully constructed my reality to make me small and controllable and grateful for scraps. Unlearning those deeply ingrained patterns of thinking was painful work, but necessary. I was learning to trust my own judgment, to believe I deserved good things, to recognize manipulation when I saw it, instead of automatically assuming I was wrong or difficult or overreacting. The financial situation had been resolved as completely as possible. The court-ordered restitution meant my parents had to repay $520,000, the original $400,000 they'd stolen plus interest and damages. They'd been forced to sell their house to cover it, the house they'd refinanced using my trust fund as collateral. I felt a pang of something when I heard they were moving to a small apartment across town, but it wasn't exactly guilt. Maybe it was grief for the relationship we could have had if they'd chosen differently, if they'd been honest, if they'd actually loved me the way parents should love their children. The trust fund, once the restitution was paid back into it, held about $2.7 million. More than enough to change my life completely, but I'd been terrified of it at first, scared that having money would change me or make me careless, or somehow prove my parents right about their fears of me becoming spoiled. Dr. Martinez had helped me work through that fear too. Money itself wasn't good or evil, it was a tool. How I chose to use it would define its impact on my life. The first thing I did once I had full access was pay off every penny of my student loans. $60,000 gone in one transaction. The feeling of freedom when I saw that zero balance was indescribable. No more monthly payments, no more interest accumulating, no more weight of debt hanging over every financial decision. Then I'd paid off the $30,000 in fraudulent credit card debt my parents had stuck me with, another burden lifted. After that, I'd sat down with a financial advisor Grandpa Walter recommended, a man named Robert Chen who specialized in helping people manage sudden windfalls responsibly. Together we'd created a diversified investment portfolio, set up an emergency fund, started retirement accounts, and planned for long-term financial security. I hadn't gone crazy with spending despite having access to millions. The years of poverty had trained me to be careful with money, sometimes too careful. I had to actively work against the instinct to buy the cheapest version of everything, to deny myself small pleasures, to feel guilty about any purchase that wasn't absolutely necessary. Dr. Martinez and I talked about finding balance, about allowing myself to enjoy some of the opportunities this money provided without feeling like I was betraying the struggling version of myself, who'd worked 3 jobs and eaten ramen for years. I'd bought a modest house, nothing extravagant, just a comfortable three-bedroom ranch in a safe neighborhood with a fenced yard. It was the first space that was truly mine, where no one could charge me rent or tell me I was a burden for existing in it. One of the things I was most proud of was the scholarship fund it established. The Charlotte Hayes Nursing Scholarship provided $50,000 annually to nursing students from low-income backgrounds who were working their way through school. Recipients got $10,000 per year for tuition, books, and living expenses, hopefully making their path a little easier than mine had been. The first year WED awarded scholarships to 5 students, and reading their applications, seeing their struggles and determination and dreams, had been both heartbreaking and inspiring. I knew exactly what they were going through. If I could ease that burden even slightly for a handful of people, the money was serving a purpose beyond just making my own life comfortable. My relationship with work had changed too. I'd returned to City General Hospital after the truth came out, and my supervisor, Linda, had apologized sincerely for suggesting I take leave based on gossip rather than facts. Shed offered me a promotion to charge nurse position, partly as an apology, and partly because I'd earned it through 3 years of excellent work. I'd accepted, finding that I loved the leadership aspects of the role, mentoring newer nurses and coordinating patient care across the unit. Having financial security meant I could work because I wanted to, because I found meaning in it, not because missing a paycheck would mean I couldn't pay rent. That shift in perspective made the hard days more bearable and the good days even better. Some relationships in my life were healing, while others remained fractured, maybe permanently. My friendship with Kelly was stronger than before because WED worked through a real conflict and come out the other side. Shed learned not to believe gossip without verification, and I'd learned to be more open about when I was struggling, instead of hiding everything behind a facade of being fine. Cousin Rachel and I talked regularly now, and Shed become an unexpected ally in navigating family dynamics. Aunt Dorothy had essentially adopted me as a surrogate daughter, including me in holiday plans and checking in regularly to make sure I was doing okay. Uncle Frank made a point of inviting both Grandpa Walter and me to family gatherings, making it clear that we were welcome and valued. But other relatives, the ones who'd defended my parents even after seeing the evidence, remained distant or hostile. Some people couldn't accept that parents they'd known for decades were capable of such calculated cruelty. Some people valued maintaining family peace over acknowledging hard truths. It had to accept that I couldn't control their perceptions, couldn't force them to understand, couldn't make them see me as anything other than the troublemaker who'd torn the family apart. It hurt, especially the ones I'd been close to before. But Dr. Martinez reminded me regularly that their judgment said more about them than about me. Marcus and I were slowly, cautiously rebuilding something resembling a sibling relationship. Had done his own therapy, worked through his guilt and his own manipulation by our parents, and made genuine efforts to make amends. We met for coffee every few weeks, conversations that were sometimes stilted and awkward but occasionally reached moments of real connection. Had apologized probably 100 times, and I'd finally reached a point where I could say I forgave him, even if trust would take longer to rebuild. He was trying. That had to count for something. My parents and I had no contact per the court order, but I heard through various family members that they'd moved to a small apartment, both gotten jobs for the first time in years, and were struggling to adjust to a reality where people knew what they'd done. My mother apparently still played victim to anyone who would listen, claiming I'd destroyed their lives over a misunderstanding. My father apparently refused to talk about it at all. I didn't know if they'd ever actually understand the gravity of what they'd done, or if they'd always see themselves as the wronged parties. It had to accept that their growth and self-awareness wasn't my responsibility. I couldn't fix them or make them better people. I could only control my own healing and my own choices going forward. The 5-year no-contact order meant I wouldn't have to deal with any of that directly until I was 30 years old. By then, I hoped to be in a strong enough place emotionally that their presence or absence wouldn't define my well-being. Right now, a year into this journey, I still had hard days where the grief and anger felt overwhelming. Days where I mourned the parents I'd thought I had, the childhood I'd deserved but didn't get, the years with Grandpa Walter that had been stolen from both of us. Dr. Martinez assured me that grief wasn't linear, that healing wasn't a straight line from pain to peace. Some days it'd feel strong and confident and grateful for my new life. Other days it'd feel broken and confused and angry that any of this had happened in the first place. Both were valid. Both were part of the process. Sitting at my dining room table on my 26th birthday, watching Grandpa Walter laugh at one of Cousin Rachel's stories, seeing Kelly and Aunt Dorothy chatting comfortably, I felt a wave of gratitude that surprised me with its intensity. This was real. These relationships were built on truth and mutual respect and genuine affection. Nobody here wanted anything from me except my company and my happiness. Nobody was manipulating me or using me or lying to my face while plotting behind my back. The family I'd been born into had betrayed me, but I was building a chosen family now, people who'd proven through their actions that they deserved my trust. As we cut into the birthday cake, Aunt Dorothy made a toast. "To Charlotte," she said, raising her wine glass, who survived something that would have broken most people and came out stronger on the other side. "We're proud of you and we love you." Everyone echoed the sentiment, glasses clinking, and I felt tears prick my eyes, but the good kind this time. Healing tears. Grateful tears. Tears that acknowledged pain, but also recognized hope. I'd learned so much in the year since my 25th birthday. I'd learned that financial abuse was real and devastating, that family title didn't excuse betrayal, that it was never too late to stand up for yourself even when it felt impossible. I'd learned that money revealed character rather than creating it, that my worth wasn't determined by how others treated me, that healing was possible but required time and work and patience. Most importantly, I'd learned that I deserved better than what I'd been given. That revelation, simple as it sounded, had been the hardest and most transformative. For 25 years, I'd believed I was difficult, ungrateful, a burden, someone who should be thankful for scraps and never ask for more. Learning to believe I actually deserved love and honesty and respect, that I wasn't asking too much by expecting basic decency from my parents, that their abuse was about their failings and not mine, that had been revolutionary. I still struggled with it sometimes, still heard their voices in my head telling me I was selfish, or overreacting, or too sensitive. But I was getting better at recognizing those voices as lies, remnants of their conditioning rather than truth about who I was. Later that evening, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I checked my trust fund balance on my phone. It was a habit I'd developed, not out of greed or obsession, but as a way of grounding myself in reality. This money was real. My grandfather's love was real. The opportunities ahead of me were real. I wasn't the struggling girl working 3 jobs and eating ramen anymore, even though sometimes my brain still defaulted to that identity. I was Charlotte Hayes, 26 years old, a charge nurse, a scholarship founder, a survivor of family trauma, a woman who was slowly learning to believe she deserved good things. The balance showed $2.7 million in investments and accounts, growing steadily with compound interest and smart management. It represented security and opportunity, and my grandfather's decades of hard work and sacrifice. But more than that, it represented truth. The truth had been hidden from me for 25 years, but now it was mine to own and build on. I turned off my phone and looked around my quiet house, my safe space, my home that was truly mine. My rescue dog Luna was asleep on the couch, a golden retriever mix I'd adopted 6 months ago once I had the stability to properly care for a pet. The walls were painted colors I'd chosen, decorated with art I'd selected, arranged in ways that made sense to me without anyone else's input or criticism. This was what freedom felt like. Not perfect, not without struggles or hard days or lingering pain, but honest, real, mine. I'd lost so much to get here, lost parents and illusions and years of my life and naive trust that could never be recovered. But I'd gained something too. Self-knowledge, real relationships, the ability to trust my own judgment, connection with my grandfather, and most crucially, the understanding that I was worthy of better than I'd been taught to accept. As I write this story to share with all of you, I want you to understand these lessons that took me so long to learn. If something feels wrong in your life, If people who claim to love you consistently make you feel small or worthless or like a burden, trust that instinct. You're not crazy, you're not overreacting, you're not difficult. You might be seeing truth that others want to keep hidden. Financial abuse is insidious because it's wrapped in justifications about family and duty and values, but real family doesn't steal from you. Real love doesn't require you to struggle unnecessarily while resources exist to help you. If you discover betrayal from people you trusted, the pain is valid and grief is normal, and it's okay to need time and space and help to process it. You don't owe abusers forgiveness or reconciliation just because they're related to you by blood. Surround yourself with people who want you to thrive, who celebrate your successes rather than sabotaging them, who tell you truth even when it's uncomfortable rather than lies that keep you compliant. Healing is possible, but it takes time, often more time than you think it should, and that's okay. Be patient with yourself. Seek professional help if you need it. Therapy quite literally saved my life and my sanity. And remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. You can be valuable and deserving and wonderful, even if the people who should have recognized that failed to do so. Their failure is about them, not about you. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever discovered a major betrayal or lie from someone close to you? How did you handle it? What helped you heal? Drop your stories in the comments, because I promise you're not alone in this kind of pain. And if this story resonated with you or helped you feel less isolated in your own struggles, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can build a community of people supporting each other through hard truths and difficult healing. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than they're accepting, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish even when people say it is, that truth matters even when lies are more comfortable. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for being here, for being part of this community. I'm sending so much love and strength to anyone who's fighting their own battles with family trauma or financial abuse or any kind of betrayal. You deserve peace, you deserve truth, and you deserve people in your life who actually want the best for you. Keep going. It gets better. Not perfect, but better. And that's enough.